Hello everyone, a new episode of MemoMap. Today we are going to simplify an important organ in our body, which is the liver. So let's start. Today we are discussing two main points: the organization and the structure of the liver, and the main function of the liver. Starting with the organization and the structure. Remember that the functional unit of the liver is the lobule. So, what is inside the lobule? Inside the lobule, there are three main components: irradiating hepatocyte, pile canaliculi, and sinusoidal. All are around the central hepatic vein. So, all these structures are built around the central vein. And remember also that in the sinusoid we have two important cells, the endothelium and the Kupffer cells that phagocyte the bacteria derived from the gastrointestinal tract. How the blood flow move in the hepatic lobule? First, the blood coming from the portal vein, carrying the blood from GIT, that it enters the sinusoid, then flow to the central vein, then hepatic vein, and finally to the vena cava. Don't forget that the hepatic artery also supplies the liver. It brings the oxygenated arterial blood to the liver cells. The interlobular area. In addition to the lobule, we have an interlobular region, it containing a trait of hepatic artery, portal vein, and a bile duct. What is the function of the liver? The function of the liver, to remember, we can simplify all the liver function in just one sentence, which is very many items do help appetite. Remember, very many items do help appetite. The V stands for the vascular and the vitamin storage. Remember that the liver is a blood reservoir. It releases blood during the hemorrhage and it stores vitamin like vitamin A, DB12, and iron. M stands for the metabolic. The liver is a metabolic center, and we are going to discuss this later on in more detail. The I stand for the immune and anti-inflammatory, which also one of important function of the liver carried by the Kupffer cell, which secretes the cytokines, and also we are going to discuss it more details. D stand for the detoxification and the excretion, and detoxification mainly for drug and toxin, and the excretion we are going to discuss more details. H stands for the hormone regulation, and here important to remember that the liver is important for secretion of the insulin growth factor and the angiotensinogen, and activate the thyroid hormone, also important to break down the hormones. A stands for the appetite regulation. So let's talk about the important functions in much more details. Now let's move to one of important rule of the liver, which is the metabolic. Remember, the liver is a metabolic center, keep our internal environment stable. So the first metabolic function is the carb. And remember, the liver is responsible for glucostat. That's to say, the liver keeps the glucose level constant. And this is occur by three main mechanisms: the synthesis of the glucose and the storage of the glucose. The synthesis of the glucose from non-carb is known as a gluconeogenesis. Glucose synthesized either from amino acid or lipid. And also it can synthesize the glucose from carb source such as the fructose and the galactose. The second is the storage in the form of glycogen. However, storage of glucose in form of glycogen is known as glycogenesis, while the breakdown of glycogen to release the glucose is a glycogenolysis. The second important metabolic function is the fat metabolisms. And here we have three main important roles for the liver: fat oxidation to produce energy, fat synthesis from carb or protein, and also the liver package the fat to travel through the blood through the formation of the lipoprotein. We have three main types: the very low density, high density and the intermediate density lipoprotein. Okay, so the fat cannot travel alone in the blood. It need also lipoprotein. So for the fat, the liver burn the fat, make the fat, and transport the fat. The protein also, in the protein metabolism, the liver has three main functions. The protein synthesis. The liver is responsible for synthesizing or of important proteins such as albumin, which is responsible for maintaining the blood volume and fluid distribution. The liver failure would result decrease the albumin escaping of the water out of blood vessels, resulting in edema and abdominal distension, ferritin for storage of iron, coagulation factors for stop of bleeding. Second function is the synthesis of non-essential amino acid, and the last function is the deamination, which is important, removing the amino group from amino acid. It's important because it removes the ammonia through converting it to a urea. Also, the deamination allows the conversion of amino to carb and fat. Also, deamination helps the formation of energy from amino acid. So, the protein metabolism rule of liver, remember it build protein, build the essential amino acid, deamination to removing the ammonia. Let's now talk about a very interesting rule of the liver, which is the immunity and inflammatory rule. The liver is a security checkpoint. It has two main immune cells, the Kupffer cells, which are two types, the preportal, which fight the gut-derived bacteria, and the prevenous, which produce nitric oxide prostaglandin. The second important cell is a natural killer cell that destroy any abnormal cells or infections. The liver as inflammatory when inflammation occur outside the liver, extrahepatic inflammation, cytokines travel to the liver. It stimulates the liver to produce interleukin 6 and acute phase protein. Acute phase protein go to the bone marrow, increase the leukocyte production. Leukocytosis go to the brain, stimulate the fever, which is pyrexia, go to the site of inflammation, enhance the leukocyte infiltration. And the anti-inflammatory rule for the liver is simple. It inhibits the neutrophil overactivity by production of protease inhibitor and inhibition of tumor necrotic factors. So, liver enhance the inflammation, also stop the inflammation. The second or the third function of the livers for today is the excretory function. There are three important substances or excreted from the liver, which is the bilirubin, which is the breakdown of the RBCs, and failure to excrete will result in jaundice. The bile salt, which is important for fat soluble vitamin reabsorption, such as vitamin A, D, K. Key failure of secretion of the bile salt result in vitamin K deficiency and bleeding. The last excretory is the bicarb, and it's important to neutralize the gastric acid. The last function we are going to discuss here is the appetite control, and here important to remember the fibroblast growth factors 21, and here it is important with a high carb intake, the secretion of the FGF21 from the liver will act on the paraventricular or PVN nuclei, resulting in limiting of carb intake and reduction of the appetite. Also, it increases the fat acid oxidation, ketogenesis, and the insulin sensitivity. The end of today's video, the liver is a smart factory responsible for security, storage, and controlling. Remember, today we start with the structures, and here we have loopule and interloopule inside each. Remember three important things. In the loopule, we have a hepatocyte, sinusoid, bile duct. And in the interlocular, we have hepatic artery, bile duct, and portal vein. In the functions, remember very many items to help the appetite. V, vasculars and vitamins. Remember the vitamin A, D, B12. M stands for the metabolic, for the glucose and glucostasis. Remember 3, gluconeogenesis, and the glycogen storage, and the fructose and galactose as a synthesis for glucose. For the fat, remember 3, oxidation of fat, for energy, synthesis of the fat from carb and protein, and transporting by the lipoprotein. For protein, also remember 3, protein synthesis, non-essential amino acid synthesis, and deamination. In the immunity and anti-inflammatory, two important immune cell cover natural killer. It enhances the inflammation by acute phase protein, stop the inflammation by suppress the neutrophil, by inhibition of tumor necrotic factors. Also, the detoxification and excretion. For excretion, remember 3B, bilirubin, pyrsalt, and bicarb. And the hormonal function, it remembers that it produces the IGF, angiotensin, activate thyroid, break down others all hormones. For the appetite, remember the FGF21, which inhibits the appetite, enhance fat oxidation, enhance ketogenesis, and insulin sensitivity too. So this is all for our today liver functions, and see you in next episodes.